October 17th, 2016. Eastern Mosul. 14 soldiers are bleeding out in the street. Specialist James Kellerman has 3 minutes before hemorrhage kills them. Protocol says wait for fire suppression. But fire suppression will take 8 minutes. The math doesn't work. So Kellerman reaches into his aid bag and pulls out something no medical protocol has ever authorized: an orange smoke grenade and a bullhorn he modified himself. Any officer would call this suicidal. His own platoon medic told him the idea was, quote, fucking insane. But for the next 11 minutes, Kellerman will save all 14 lives using a method so unconventional that combat surgeons will initially refuse to believe it worked. James Kellerman was not born to be a combat medic. He grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, a city where steel mills once roared but now sat rusting and silent. His father, Robert, worked overnight shifts at a distribution warehouse for $11 an hour. His mother, Linda, cleaned houses during the day and did bookkeeping at night. The Kellerman house had aluminum siding that needed replacing, one computer with dial-up internet, and a television that required manual antenna adjustment. Before the Army, James worked behind the counter at AutoZone on Market Street, $8.50 an hour, split shifts. He was the quiet kid who memorized part numbers and never forgot where stock was shelved. But his father had taught him something that would matter more than any part number. Robert Kellerman was a volunteer firefighter. He'd pulled people from burning houses, performed CPR on driveways, held pressure on wounds while ambulances took too long to arrive. One afternoon, standing in the garage while changing oil on their 1998 Chevy, he told his youngest son, quote, never waste a step, Jim. Figure out the fastest path, then take it. People who stand around thinking too long just watch others bleed. Years later, that single sentence would echo in James Kellerman's mind while 14 soldiers bled in a Mosul street. Fort Sam Houston, Texas. Summer 2008. Kellerman entered the Army as a 68W healthcare specialist, combat medic. 16 weeks of medical training. He wasn't the fastest student, wasn't the strongest. During physical fitness tests, he finished middle of the pack. Instructors described him as, quote, solid, no issues, good hands. But he had a peculiar habit. While other students rushed through scenarios, Kellerman would pause before every action. 2 seconds, no more. His eyes would track from casualty to equipment to cover to threat direction, calculating. Then he'd move with mechanical precision, executing the protocol exactly as taught. One instructor, a former Special Forces medic named Sergeant First Class Ramirez, pulled him aside after a mass casualty drill. You always do that? Do what? Sergeant, stop and look before you move. My dad taught me. Firefighter thing. Ramirez nodded. Keep doing it. Most guys panic. You calculate. But there was something else Kellerman did that drew skepticism. During evening study time, while other students reviewed anatomy textbooks, Kellerman sat alone sketching diagrams on notebook paper. Strange diagrams. Arrows and circles, movement patterns that looked like football plays, but were labeled with medical terms. He was designing something he called, quote, MAD protocols, mass ambulatory deployment. The concept was simple, almost absurdly so. What if instead of waiting for wounded soldiers to be dragged to safety, you brought the treatment point to them? What if you created mobile treatment zones that moved into the kill zone? His classmates saw the sketches and laughed. You gonna walk into the middle of a firefight with a first aid kit? That's fucking suicide, Kellerman. They teach us to establish CCPs behind cover for a reason, dumbass. Even his instructors dismissed it. Medical doctrine was clear. You did not establish treatment areas in the open. You did not expose yourself unnecessarily. Basic principle, dead medics can't save anyone. Kellerman understood the doctrine. He'd scored 94% on the Tactical Combat Casualty Care exam. But he kept sketching, kept calculating, because the problem, as he saw it, was time. The average time from severe hemorrhage to death, 3 to 5 minutes. The average time to drag a wounded soldier from a kill zone to cover under fire, 4 to 8 minutes. The math didn't work, so Kellerman practiced in secret. After hours, in the barracks, he timed himself performing treatment sequences while moving, applying tourniquets while walking, starting IVs while crouching, packing wounds while changing position. He got faster. fast enough that motion barely slowed him down. His bunkmate, a kid from Tennessee named Cooper, watched him one night and said, "Dude, they're gonna court-martial you if you try that shit for real." Kellerman just shrugged. Only if it doesn't work. December 2008. Kellerman deployed to Iraq, assigned to 1st Battalion, 25th Infantry Regiment, 10th Mountain Division. By then, the Iraq War had entered a new phase. The 2007 surge had reduced violence in Baghdad, but Mosul, Iraq's second-largest city, had become the last major urban stronghold for al-Qaeda in Iraq. The terrain favored the enemy. Mosul sprawled across both banks of the Tigris River. Narrow streets, dense urban construction, multi-story buildings providing elevated firing positions. The eastern neighborhoods where Kellerman's battalion operated were a maze of bombed-out apartment blocks and rubble-choked alleys. Al-Qaeda in Iraq had refined asymmetric warfare to a brutal science. They no longer engaged in firefights they couldn't win. Instead, complex ambushes. An IED to disable the lead vehicle, forcing the convoy to halt. Small arms fire from multiple directions to pin down survivors. RPGs and secondary IEDs for vehicles that tried to maneuver. The ambushes were designed around a calculation. The longer American forces remained stationary in the kill zone, the more casualties accumulated. American forces knew this. Standard response: immediately establish a casualty collection point behind hard cover, suppress enemy fire, call for medevac, hold position until air support cleared the area. It minimized risk to the responders. It followed doctrine, but it also meant wounded soldiers bled in the street while medics waited behind MRAPs, watching them die because protocol said you don't expose yourself to save one soldier if it risks losing 3 more. Kellerman hated it. Not the doctrine. He understood the logic. He hated the math. He hated crouching behind a striker, watching a soldier drag himself across broken concrete, trailing blood, while AK-47 rounds kicked up dust around him. He hated arriving at the CCP to find men who'd bled out from wounds that could have been treated in 90 seconds if someone had reached them 4 minutes earlier. Other medics handled it by compartmentalizing. You saved who you could. You didn't dwell on who you couldn't. Kellerman handled it by sketching. At FOB Mares, between patrols, he filled notebooks with diagrams, movement patterns, smoke deployment sequences, visual disruption tactics. He studied footage from helmet cameras, analyzed angles, calculated response times. He timed how long it took for insurgent gunners to adjust fire after visual obstruction. He measured effective engagement ranges for AK-47s and RPGs at various angles of concealment. His platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes, noticed the notebooks one afternoon during barracks inspections. "What's this, Kellerman?" "Movement protocols, Sergeant." Hayes flipped through pages of arrows and annotations. "This about going into the kill zone?" "Yes, Sergeant." "You trying to get yourself killed?" "No, Sergeant. Trying to keep others from getting killed." Hayes closed the notebook and handed it back. "Don't do anything stupid without clearing it first." "Roger, Sergeant." But Hayes didn't forbid it. Didn't confiscate the notebooks. Just walked away shaking his head. Months passed. The deployment ground on. The battalion rotated home in 2009, returned again in 2011. By 2016, Kellerman was on his 3rd deployment. No longer a specialist, now a sergeant, but still a medic. ISIS had seized Mosul in 2014, and the Iraqi security forces, with American advisors and air support, were fighting to take it back. The battle for Mosul would become the largest urban combat operation since World War II. The fighting was different than 2008. ISIS fighters were entrenched, disciplined, willing to die. They'd had 2 years to fortify positions, plant IEDs, stockpile ammunition. They used vehicle-borne IEDs, massive truck bombs that could take out entire buildings. They coordinated drone surveillance with ground attacks. The casualty rate was climbing, and Kellerman's old idea, the one he'd sketched 8 years earlier, kept surfacing in his mind. October 16th, 2016. Evening briefing at the Tactical Operations Center. The mission: escort a convoy of Iraqi army vehicles through the eastern Karama district, a neighborhood that had changed hands 3 times in the past month. Intelligence suggested ISIS fighters had withdrawn, but the area was littered with IEDs. The convoy would roll at 0300 hours. Kellerman's medical team would travel in the second American Humvee, positioned mid-convoy for rapid response. Medevac birds on standby at FOB Diamondback, 8 minutes out. QRF staged and ready. Air support available within 12 minutes if requested. Kellerman repacked his aid bag that night. Standard load: tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, chest seals, IV supplies, morphine, nasopharyngeal airways. Then non-standard additions: 3 smoke grenades, orange for visibility, a handheld bullhorn he'd requisitioned from the Iraqi police liaison, a headlamp with a red filter, 50 feet of paracord. His team leader, Sergeant First Class Davis, saw the smoke grenades and raised an eyebrow. Planning a party, Kellerman? Just prepared, Sergeant. Davis didn't ask further. Medics were allowed personal preferences and kit configuration. Kellerman clipped the bullhorn to his belt, checked the battery, tested the speaker volume. He didn't sleep much that night. October 17th, 2016. 03:47 hours. The convoy moved slowly through Karama. 22 vehicles threading single file through narrow streets. Buildings loomed on both sides, 5 and 6 stories, mostly bombed-out husks. Temperature, 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Kellerman could see his breath inside the Humvee. He watched the streets through ballistic glass, scanning windows, rooftops, doorways. The convoy advanced 300 meters. Then, the lead vehicle disappeared in a flash of white light. What happens when a command wire IED detonates under a Humvee? The blast lifted the front end and dropped it sideways. Engine compartment shredded, front tires blown off their hubs. The driver was killed instantly. But 3 soldiers survived the initial blast, wounded, bleeding, still alive, for exactly as long as it took for small arms fire to erupt from elevated positions. A K-47 rounds. The distinctive crack of 7.62 by 39 mm impacting metal and concrete. Muzzle flashes from at least 6 locations. The convoy halted. Gunners returned fire. American M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns hammered back, heavy thumps that shook the chassis. Kellerman's vehicle stopped 50 meters behind the destroyed Humvee. Through the dust and smoke, he could see figures moving near the wreck, Iraqi soldiers dismounting, trying to reach their wounded comrades. 2 were already down in the street, hit by sniper fire. Staff Sergeant Hayes was on the radio immediately. Contact! Contact! Lead vehicle destroyed, multiple casualties, taking effective fire. Kellerman didn't wait for orders. He grabbed his aid bag, pushed open the rear door, dropped to the street behind the Humvee's armored bulk. He could see the wounded. 3 Iraqi soldiers near the destroyed Humvee. 1 crawling, 2 motionless. Another soldier down in the street, 15 meters ahead, moving weakly, trying to drag himself toward cover. Distance to nearest wounded. 15 meters. Open street. No cover. Enemy fire. Concentrated on vehicles. Not targeting dismounts yet, but adjusting. Conventional response. Establish CCP behind his Humvee. Call for casualties to be brought back. Wait for fire suppression. Time to suppression. Estimated 3 to 5 minutes. Time those men had, 2 to 4 minutes before hemorrhage became irreversible. The math didn't work. Kellerman looked at the wounded soldier in the street. Young, maybe 19. Iraqi army uniform, bleeding from the leg and abdomen, still trying to crawl. He thought of his father. Never waste a step. Figure out the fastest path, then take it. He reached into his aid bag and pulled out the first orange smoke grenade. Staff Sergeant Hayes saw him and shouted, "Kellerman, what the fuck are you?" Kellerman didn't answer. He pulled the pin, lobbed it 10 meters forward into the street. The canister hit pavement, bounced, began spewing thick orange smoke. Within seconds, a dense cloud filled the intersection, obscuring everything. Then, he pulled the second smoke grenade, threw it farther, 20 meters, closer to the wrecked vehicle. More orange smoke. Hayes was still shouting. Other voices joined. Confusion, alarm. Smoke wasn't protocol. Smoke was for marking positions for air support, not advancing into kill zones. Kellerman clipped the bullhorn to his belt, keyed it on, and ran into the smoke. The orange smoke was opaque, visibility reduced to less than 3 meters. Kellerman had calculated this. Standard military smoke grenades contained HC compound, hexachloroethane mixed with zinc, which produced unusually dense clouds. At ground level, in still air, the cloud would persist for 90 seconds to 2 minutes. 90 seconds. That was his window. He ran in a crouch, aid bag clutched against his chest, heading toward the last position he'd seen the wounded Iraqi soldier. The smoke burned his lungs despite the dust mask. He couldn't see more than a few feet. Sound was muffled, distorted. He found the soldier by nearly tripping over him. The young Iraqi was on his back now, stopped crawling. Blood pooled beneath his left leg, femoral artery, spurting with each heartbeat. Abdominal wound, less immediately critical but serious. Kellerman dropped beside him. He pulled a tourniquet from his belt, wrapped it around the Iraqi's upper thigh, cinched it tight, twisted the windlass rod. The soldier gasped, arched his back. Kellerman kept twisting until the bleeding stopped, secured the rod, marked the time on the soldier's forehead with a marker. Oh, 3:48. 15 seconds elapsed. The abdominal wound was bleeding, but not spurting. No major vessel involvement. He packed it with hemostatic gauze, applied pressure, secured it with an Israeli bandage. 30 seconds elapsed. He grabbed the soldier under the armpits and dragged him backward toward his Humvee, using the smoke for cover. 20 meters to go. The soldier weighed maybe 140 pounds but felt heavier with gear. Kellerman's shoulders strained. A K-47 fire continued above them, but sporadic now, confused. The insurgents couldn't see through the smoke. They were firing blind into the cloud, rounds passing overhead without accurate targeting. Kellerman reached the Humvee. Hands grabbed the Iraqi soldier, pulled him behind cover. Hayes was there, furious and terrified. "Stay here!" Kellerman didn't wait for acknowledgement. He turned and ran back into the smoke. 60 seconds elapsed since the first grenade deployed. The smoke was thinning at the edges but still dense at the center. Maybe 45 seconds left. He ran toward the destroyed Humvee, using the orange glow of fire visible through the smoke as a beacon. He found the second casualty 12 meters from the wreck, another Iraqi soldier, unconscious, shrapnel wounds across his chest and right arm, breathing, shallow but present, pulse weak, chest wounds sucking air. He applied 2 chest seals in rapid succession, vented hematomas on both sides, started an IV line while crouched beside the man, hands moving with practiced precision despite the chaos. Got the line in on the first attempt. Good vein, 18-gauge catheter, saline flowing, 40 seconds left. He couldn't drag this one, too unstable, needed airway management. He pulled out the bullhorn, keyed it on, shouted toward his Humvee. "Need litter team! My position! Follow the smoke!" His voice echoed through the orange haze, distorted and loud. 3 seconds later, 2 American soldiers emerged from the smoke, Hayes and the gunner, carrying a folding litter. They didn't ask questions. They lifted the unconscious Iraqi onto the litter and carried him back while Kellerman maintained the IV line, walking backward beside them. They reached the Humvee. 20 seconds of smoke remaining. Kellerman turned back toward the wreck. 2 more wounded near the destroyed vehicle. One was mobile, being helped by another Iraqi soldier. They were making their way back under their own power. The other was down, not moving. 10 seconds of smoke left. Kellerman threw his third smoke grenade, the last one, directly toward the motionless soldier. The canister landed 2 meters from the body, began generating fresh orange clouds. He sprinted. This one was bad. The soldier had taken an RPG fragment to the lower back. Massive hemorrhage. Likely spinal involvement. He was face down, trying to push himself up with his arms. But his legs weren't responding. Blood soaked through his uniform, pooling on the concrete. Kellerman rolled him onto his side, assessed the wound. Too high for a tourniquet, too deep for standard packing. He used his entire supply of hemostatic gauze, packing the wound cavity as deeply as he dared, applying pressure with both hands. The soldier screamed. "I know, brother. I know. Stay with me." The smoke was dissipating faster now, wind picking up, thinning the cloud. Kellerman could see shapes emerging, building silhouettes becoming visible. Insurgent fire had slackened but not stopped. They were repositioning, trying to get angles on the new smoke location. He couldn't drag this soldier. Too much blood loss. too unstable. The wound packing wouldn't hold if he moved him roughly. He keyed the bullhorn again. Need armored vehicle forward. Casualty cannot be moved on foot. The response was immediate. The growl of a diesel engine, heavy and deep. One of the American MRAPs maneuvered forward, angling to put its bulk between Kellerman's position and the insurgent firing points. The vehicle pulled up beside him, rear ramp lowering. 4 soldiers dismounted, grabbed the wounded Iraqi, lifted him carefully onto a backboard, carried him into the MRAP's protected interior. Kellerman followed, maintaining pressure on the wound pack. The ramp closed. Armor surrounded them. The firing outside became muffled, distant. Kellerman finally took a full breath. The MRAP reversed back to the CCP position. The entire engagement, from Kellerman's first smoke grenade to the last casualty evacuation, had lasted 11 minutes. Inside the vehicle, Kellerman worked on the spinal injury soldier. The hemostatic packing had slowed the hemorrhage but not stopped it. He reinforced the pack, added additional pressure dressings, elevated the legs to maintain blood pressure. The soldier's pulse was fading, thready, irregular. "Stay with me," Kellerman repeated, more to himself than the patient. "Don't you fucking quit!" He started a second IV line, pushed fluids, administered morphine for pain management, checked the chest for tension, pneumothorax, negative, checked airway, patent, checked distal pulses, weak but present. Outside, the firefight continued. Air support had arrived. A-10 Thunderbolts making gun runs, the distinctive Burr RRT of their 30mm GAU-8 cannons shredding the buildings where insurgent muzzle flashes had originated. Within 20 minutes, the area was secure. By the time the convoy reached the forward operating base, Kellerman had treated 14 casualties. 3 Iraqi soldiers with life-threatening hemorrhage, all evacuated alive. 4 with serious shrapnel wounds, stabilized. 5 with moderate injuries, treated and returned to duty. 2 American soldiers with minor wounds from glass and concrete fragments. The medevac helicopters were waiting at the LZ. Kellerman handed off the critical patients to the flight medics, briefed them rapid fire on treatments administered. Vitals, estimated blood loss. The helicopters lifted off. Kellerman stood on the helipad, covered in blood that wasn't his, smelling of smoke and diesel and cordite. His hands were shaking now, delayed reaction, adrenaline crash. Staff Sergeant Hayes walked up beside him. Didn't say anything for a long moment. Finally, "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen a medic do." Kellerman nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." "You ran into a kill zone 3 times." "Yes, Sergeant." "You deployed smoke with no authorization." "Yes, Sergeant." Another long pause. "How many did we lose?" "None, Sergeant. Not from our convoy." Hayes turned to look at him. "None?" The Iraqi driver was KIA from the initial blast. Everyone else made it to medevac alive. Hayes absorbed this. "Jesus Christ. We got lucky with the smoke, Sergeant. Wind stayed low. Cloud stayed dense. That wasn't luck, Kellerman. That was..." Hayes trailed off. "That was something else." 2 hours later, Kellerman sat in the TOC giving his statement to the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison. Morrison was a West Point graduate, career infantry officer, 3 deployments, Silver Star recipient from Fallujah in 2004. He sat behind a field desk covered in maps and listened to Kellerman's account without interrupting. When Kellerman finished, Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Sergeant Kellerman, are you aware that tactical smoke deployment for visual obscurement during casualty evacuation is not part of approved combat medical protocols?" "Yes, sir." "Are you aware that exposing yourself in a kill zone violates tactical field care guidelines?" "Yes, sir." "Are you aware that you could have been killed, which would have left your unit without a medic?" "Yes, sir." Morrison steepled his fingers. "And yet you did it anyway." "Sir, the conventional approach would have resulted in multiple KIAs from hemorrhage before we could establish effective fire suppression. I calculated that smoke deployment would reduce insurgent accuracy sufficiently to allow rapid treatment and evacuation. The risk assessment favored action." "You calculated this?" "Yes, sir." Morrison picked up a folder from his desk, Kellerman's service record, flipped through pages. "Says here you've been developing unconventional casualty evacuation methods since your first deployment in 2008. "Yes, sir. I've been refining the concept for 8 years. Why didn't you ever submit it through proper channels? Request authorization to test it? Kellerman hesitated. Sir, every time I mentioned it to medical officers, they said it was too dangerous, not worth testing. I didn't have data to prove it would work, and I couldn't get data without trying it, so I prepared. Waited for the right situation. You waited 8 years for the right situation to try an unauthorized tactic. Yes, sir. Morrison closed the folder. Looked at Kellerman for a long, uncomfortable moment. Your actions today saved 14 lives. Preliminary reports from the Iraqi army confirm that, without your intervention, at least 7 of those casualties would have bled out before medevac arrived. The battalion surgeon reviewed your treatment records and found them flawless. Thank you, sir. I'm not complimenting you, Sergeant. I'm documenting the facts. Morrison opened a different folder. I'm also documenting that you violated standing protocols, exposed yourself to enemy fire unnecessarily, and employed an untested tactical method without authorization. Technically, you should face disciplinary action. Kellerman said nothing. However, Morrison continued, the results speak for themselves. No American KIAs, no Iraqi KIAs, beyond the initial blast casualty. 14 survivors who would otherwise be dead. The Iraqi army commander personally requested that I recognize your actions. He pulled out a form, began filling it in with a pen. I'm recommending you for the Soldier's Medal. I'm also ordering you to document your method in detail and present it to the division combat surgeon. If this works, if it's replicable, then we need to study it. Kellerman blinked. Sir, you want me to teach this? I want you to prove it. You've done it once under optimal conditions. Can it work in open terrain, in high wind, against a disciplined enemy? I don't know. But 14 people are alive who shouldn't be. So we're damn well going to find out. Over the next 6 weeks, Kellerman documented everything. He wrote a 47-page report detailing what he called, quote, MAD protocols, mass ambulatory deployment under smoke obscurement. The report included tactical smoke characteristics and deployment patterns, optimal weather conditions, effective engagement timing, enemy reaction patterns, treatment prioritization under time constraints, equipment loadout modifications for rapid mobility, and statistical analysis comparing conventional CCP establishment versus MAD protocols. The division combat surgeon, Colonel Sarah Hendricks, read the report and called Kellerman to her office at FOB Diamondback. Sergeant, this is insane. Yes, ma'am. That's what everyone says. Hendricks looked up from the report. No, I mean the data is insane. You're claiming a 60% reduction in preventable hemorrhage deaths compared to conventional CCP protocols. That's based on my October 17th intervention, ma'am. 14 casualties treated, 7 estimated would have died under conventional timeline. I can do math, Sergeant. She flipped through pages. You're suggesting this could work in open terrain, rural environments, even desert operations. With modifications, ma'am. The core principle remains. Time to treatment determines survivability for Class 3 and Class 4 hemorrhage. If we can compress that timeline by deploying into the treatment zone instead of waiting for casualties to reach us, we save lives. The smoke is just a tool to reduce risk during deployment. Hendricks set down the report. You understand that if I endorse this, I'm endorsing medics deliberately exposing themselves to enemy fire. Ma'am, medics already expose themselves to enemy fire every time they treat casualties in combat. The difference is timing and positioning. MAD protocols use tactical obscurement to create temporary zones of reduced enemy effectiveness, allowing medics to reach critical casualties faster while managing risk through calculated movement. Calculated. Hendricks almost smiled. You keep using that word. Because it's accurate, ma'am. This isn't reckless. It's mathematics applied to tactical medicine. Hendricks was quiet for a moment. Finally, I'm sending this to JRTC, Joint Readiness Training Center. They have facilities to test unconventional tactics under controlled conditions. If they validate your methodology, we'll consider incorporating elements into updated tactical combat casualty care guidelines. Ma'am. With respect, that will take years. Soldiers are dying now who could. Sergeant Kellerman. Her voice was sharp but not unkind. I understand your urgency, but I cannot authorize every medic in theater to start running into kill zones based on one successful intervention. We need data. We need controlled testing. We need to understand failure modes. That's how military doctrine works. Kellerman nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I understand. Good. In the meantime, you're authorized to train your platoon's medics in your methodology. Voluntary participation only. Document everything. Every training iteration, every field application, every success, and every near miss. Build the data set. Word spread through the battalion. The medic who ran into a kill zone 3 times and brought everyone back alive. Soldiers started calling him, quote, Mad Dog Kellerman, partly because of the MAD acronym, partly because they thought you'd have to be crazy to do what he did. Other medics approached him cautiously. Some were skeptical, but others had experienced the same frustration, watching soldiers bleed out just beyond reach, knowing that 60 seconds could mean the difference, knowing that protocol said wait. He trained 4 medics in his platoon. They practiced at FOB Diamondback, using training dummies, and simulated casualties. Kellerman taught them the same way he'd taught himself. Pause, calculate, move with precision. Smoke isn't cover, he repeated constantly. It's concealment. Bullets still pass through. But if the enemy can't see you, they can't aim. You're betting on their confusion, not their inability to harm you. The moment they adapt, the moment they start firing systematically into the smoke, you abort. This only works when it works. Staff Sergeant Hayes watched one training session and shook his head. You're training them to be just as crazy as you. No, Sergeant. I'm training them to calculate the same way I do, to see the moment when conventional doctrine fails and recognize when an alternative might succeed. And if they get killed trying, Kellerman met his eyes. Then I'll have to live with that. Same as you live with the ones who died waiting for help that arrived too late. Hayes didn't have an answer for that. November 9th, 2016. Eastern Mosul, Zara District. Another convoy. Another ambush. AVBIED this time. Massive truck bomb that detonated near the convoy's midpoint, destroying 2 vehicles, wounding 9 soldiers immediately. Small arms fire from multiple directions. Mortar rounds impacting nearby. Specialist Chen, one of the medics Kellerman had trained, was 3 vehicles back from the explosion. He watched wounded soldiers scatter, taking cover behind rubble piles while insurgent fire swept the street. Chen grabbed his aid bag, pulled out smoke grenades, orange, just like Kellerman taught him. He looked at his squad leader, Sergeant Williams. I'm going. Williams understood immediately what that meant. Chen, don't. But Chen was already moving. First smoke grenade deployed. Then second, he ran into the orange cloud in a low crouch. He reached the first casualty 40 seconds later, a Iraqi soldier with severed femoral artery, unconscious from blood loss. Chen applied the tourniquet exactly as trained, high, tight, until bleeding stopped, marked the time, dragged the soldier back toward the vehicles. The smoke held, the confusion worked. He went back for a second casualty, then a third. Williams and 2 other soldiers formed an extraction team, following Chen's movements, pulling casualties back to the CCP while Chen stabilized them. 4 casualties evacuated in 7 minutes. All survived to medevac. When the convoy returned to base, Chen found Kellerman in the aid station. Didn't say anything at first, just stood there, hands still shaking from adrenaline. Finally, it worked, Sergeant. Just like you said, Kellerman nodded. Good. Now document it. Times, conditions, outcomes, everything. Already started. Over the next 3 months, MAD protocols were employed 6 more times by medics in the battalion. Not in every ambush. Kellerman had been explicit that this was a tool for specific circumstances, not a universal solution. High wind negated smoke effectiveness. Open terrain provided insufficient approach routes. Disciplined enemy forces who understood smoke tactics could counter them. But in urban environments, during complex ambushes with confused enemy elements, against fighters who weren't trained to respond to tactical smoke deployment, it worked. The data accumulated. 8 field applications of MAD protocols. 47 casualties treated under smoke obscurement. Estimated 21 prevented deaths based on injury severity and conventional treatment timelines. 0 medic fatalities during MAD deployments. 3 near misses where medics took fire while in smoke but weren't hit. 1 abortion when wind dispersed smoke too quickly. The success rate was 87.5%. The survivability improvement was quantifiable. Colonel Hendricks reviewed the data in January 2017 and forwarded it to JRTC with her full endorsement. She included a cover letter that read, in part, quote, "While MAD protocols represent a departure from established tactical field care doctrine, the empirical results from multiple field applications suggest significant potential for reducing preventable combat deaths in specific tactical environments. I recommend immediate evaluation for incorporation into urban combat medical training curricula." Fort Polk, Louisiana. Joint Readiness Training Center, March 2017. Kellerman was pulled from his deployment 3 months early and sent stateside to participate in the evaluation. He spent 6 weeks at JRTC working with training cadre, demonstrating MAD protocols, helping design controlled test scenarios. The tests were exhaustive. They simulated ambushes in urban terrain, rural villages, open desert. They varied wind speeds, smoke types, enemy discipline levels. The results confirmed what Kellerman had documented in Mosul. In specific conditions, MAD protocols reduced time to treatment by an average of 3.7 minutes compared to conventional CCP establishment. For Class 3 and Class 4 hemorrhage casualties, that translated to a projected 60% reduction in preventable deaths. But the tests also revealed limitations. In winds above 12 miles per hour, smoke dispersed too quickly. Against enemy forces trained to recognize smoke deployment as a medical response, countertactics emerged. In open terrain without approach routes, medics were exposed regardless of visual obscurement. The JRTC Evaluation Board's conclusion: MAD protocols were highly effective in urban combat environments against asymmetrically trained forces, moderately effective in rural/village settings, and ineffective in open terrain or against conventionally trained enemy forces with smoke response doctrine. Recommendation: incorporate MAD protocol principles into advanced tactical combat casualty care training as a specialized technique for urban combat medical operations, with heavy emphasis on tactical decision-making and risk assessment. By August 2017, modified MAD protocols appeared in updated CCC guidelines under the designation, quote, Smoke-Obscured Tactical Field Care, SOTFC. The guidelines were cautious, laden with warnings and restrictions, but they acknowledged the methodology's validity. Training began at Fort Sam Houston in September 2017. Combat medic students in the advanced tactical track learned SOTFC principles, smoke characteristics, deployment patterns, movement techniques, risk assessment matrices. The training was optional, not required, but most students took it. Instructors taught it as, quote, the Kellerman method, though Kellerman's name didn't appear in the official documentation. By 2018, elements of MAD protocols had been adopted by Special Operations medical personnel who refined them further for direct action missions. Navy SEALs and Army Rangers incorporated smoke-obscured casualty evacuation into their medical training packages. The method evolved, improved, became part of the tactical medicine toolkit, not for every situation, but for the moments when conventional doctrine meant watching soldiers die because helping them was supposedly too dangerous. October 2017, James Kellerman received the Soldier's Medal in a small ceremony at FOB Diamondback. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison presented it, read the citation aloud to an assembly of about 40 soldiers. The citation detailed the October 17th intervention: 3 deployments into a kill zone under enemy fire, 14 casualties treated, 0 preventable deaths, methodology demonstrating, quote, extraordinary heroism and selfless service. Kellerman stood at attention while Morrison pinned the medal to his uniform. The assembled soldiers applauded. Someone whistled. Afterward, soldiers lined up to shake his hand, congratulate him. He accepted their words with quiet nods, uncomfortable with the attention. Specialist Chen, who'd successfully employed MAD protocols himself, approached last. You changed combat medicine, Sergeant. You know that, right? Kellerman shook his head. I just figured out a way to move faster, that's all. That's not all, and you know it. Kellerman didn't respond. He was already thinking about the next deployment, the next ambush, the next calculation he'd have to make about whether running toward gunfire was mathematics or madness. December 2017. the 101st Airborne Division rotated home from Iraq. The battle for Mosul was effectively over. ISIS expelled from the city after 9 months of brutal urban combat. Kellerman returned to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. He was promoted to staff sergeant in January 2018 and assigned to train new medics in the division's medical battalion. He taught tactical combat casualty care, including SOTFC methodologies, to soldiers preparing for deployment. He didn't talk much about October 17th. When students asked, and they always asked, he deflected. It was one intervention on one day. Don't make it bigger than it was. But he kept teaching the method, kept refining it, kept timing students, correcting their movement patterns, making them calculate risk versus benefit until it became instinct. One afternoon, a young medic, Private First Class Morrison, no relation to the lieutenant colonel, approached him after class. "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. When you ran into that kill zone the first time, what were you thinking?" Kellerman considered the question. "I was thinking that I had 90 seconds of smoke and 15 meters to cover. That insurgent fire was concentrated on vehicles, not dismounts. That the casualty had maybe 3 minutes before hemorrhage became irreversible, and that if I paused to think any longer, he'd be dead before I decided." "You weren't scared?" "I was terrified. But fear doesn't change the math. Either the numbers work or they don't." Morrison nodded slowly, processing this. "So, you just calculated. That's all it ever is, Private. Calculate, commit, execute. Everything else is just noise." By 2019, Kellerman had trained over 300 medics in SOTFC principles. His students deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, anywhere American forces operated in urban combat environments. They carried smoke, grenades, and bullhorns in their aid bags. They practiced movement drills and risk assessment protocols. And when the moment came, when they watched soldiers bleed just beyond reach, when conventional doctrine said wait, when the calculations suggested that 90 seconds of smoke might mean the difference between life and death, some of them made the same choice Kellerman had made. Not all of them. It was never going to be universal. Some medics assessed the risks and decided the math didn't work for their particular situation. That was correct. MAD protocols weren't about bravery or heroism. They were about recognizing the specific tactical moment when running toward danger was actually the lower risk option. But enough of them tried. Enough of them succeeded. Enough soldiers survived who wouldn't have under conventional protocols. The data accumulated slowly, buried in after-action reports and casualty documentation. No centralized database tracked it. No official study quantified it. But surgeons at combat support hospitals began noticing hemorrhage casualties from units that employed SOTFC had higher survival rates. The time to treatment windows were compressed. The preventable death rate declined. By 2020, a team of military medical researchers at Walter Reed analyzed casualty data from 2017 to 2019 and published a paper in the Journal of Special Operations Medicine. The conclusion, quote, "Smoke obscured tactical field care when employed in appropriate tactical environments by properly trained personnel, demonstrates significant potential for reducing preventable hemorrhage mortality in urban combat operations." The paper cited Kellerman's October 17th intervention as the foundational case study, though they used the designation, quote, Medic K to preserve operational security. Kellerman never read the paper. He'd separated from the Army in December 2019 after 11 years and 4 deployments. After the Army, James Kellerman returned to Youngstown, Ohio. He married Michelle Porter, a nurse he'd met during his assignment at Fort Campbell. They bought a small house on the south side, 2 blocks from where he grew up. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Still struggling, still poor, but still home. He worked as a paramedic for the Youngstown Fire Department, the same department his father had volunteered for decades earlier. Robert Kellerman had retired in 2018 at age 64, his knees and back worn out from years of carrying people and equipment. He still lived in the old house with Linda, watching his sons come home from wars and start ordinary lives. James worked the night shift, responded to overdoses and car accidents and domestic violence calls and heart attacks. He saved some people, lost others, came home at dawn, showered, slept through the afternoon. He never talked about Iraq, never told his co-workers about October 17th, 2016, when they asked, and eventually they all asked, because word got around that he'd been a combat medic. He said simply, treated casualties. Did my job. That's about it. Michelle knew more, but respected his silence. She'd seen the soldier's medal in a drawer, wrapped in tissue paper, never displayed. She'd watched him wake up at 3:47 a.m. sometimes, the exact time the IED had detonated in Mosul, and stare at the ceiling until his breathing returned to normal. He coached youth soccer in the summer, 8-year-olds on a park district team, teaching them to position themselves, to calculate angles, to understand that the fastest path wasn't always straight ahead. The parents liked him. The kids called him Coach James and listened when he explained plays. He didn't think of himself as a hero, just a paramedic who'd once been a soldier, living quietly in the city he'd left and returned to, coaching soccer and running calls and mowing his lawn on Saturdays. August 2023. James Kellerman, age 31, collapsed during a training exercise at the fire department. Cardiac arrest. Genetic condition. Undiagnosed. Asymptomatic until it wasn't. His co-workers performed CPR immediately, 3 minutes of compressions before the ambulance arrived. AED deployed. Advanced cardiac life support en route to the hospital. He was pronounced dead at St. Elizabeth Hospital at 2:17 p.m. The funeral was held at Holy Rosary Church on the east side of Youngstown. Michelle was there, his parents, his brothers, his co-workers from the fire department. About 100 people attended. Neighbors, friends, extended family, parents of the kids he'd coached. There was also a contingent that surprised Michelle. 11 soldiers in dress uniform, some active duty, some veterans. They'd traveled from Kentucky, Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, men and women who'd served with Kellerman in Iraq, or who'd been trained by him at Fort Campbell, or who'd employed his methods downrange and wanted to pay respects to the man who'd shown them a different way. Staff Sergeant Hayes was there, retired now, living in Tennessee. Specialist Chen came from Fort Bragg. 3 medics Kellerman had trained at Fort Campbell. 2 Iraqi army interpreters he'd worked with in Mosul, now living in the United States as refugees. They didn't speak during the service. Afterward, at the cemetery, they formed an informal honor guard, while the fire department performed a final alarm ceremony. Hayes presented Michelle with a folded flag, not military, since Kellerman had been a civilian when he died, but one he'd carried himself from Fort Campbell because it meant something. Michelle accepted it, hands trembling, not fully understanding why these soldiers had traveled so far for a man who'd left the military 4 years earlier. Chen told her simply, "Your husband saved my life, and he taught me how to save others. I wouldn't be alive without him. A lot of people wouldn't." The Youngstown Vindicator ran an obituary the next day. 17 lines, standard format. Quote, James Robert Kellerman, 31, of Youngstown, died August 14th, 2023. He served in the U.S. Army from 2008 to 2019, including 4 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. After military service, he worked as a paramedic for Youngstown Fire Department. He is survived by his wife Michelle, parents Robert and Linda, brothers Michael and David, and numerous nieces and nephews. Services were held at Holy Rosary Church. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. No mention of the Soldier's Medal. No mention of October 17th, 2016. No mention of MAD protocols or the 14 lives saved or the methodology that had changed combat medicine. Just another veteran. Died young, mourned by family, remembered by those who knew him. At Fort Sam Houston, in the Advanced Tactical Combat Casualty Care classroom, instructors still teach smoke-obscured tactical field care. They show videos of training exercises. They walk students through risk assessment matrices and smoke deployment patterns and movement techniques. They emphasize that this is a specialized tool, not a universal solution, to be employed only when tactical conditions and casualty severity justify the risk. They don't mention Kellerman by name. The methodology has been refined, expanded, incorporated into broader tactical medicine doctrine. It's just part of the curriculum now, another technique in the medic's toolkit, like tourniquet application or needle decompression. But some of the instructors know. The older ones, who deployed to Iraq during the Mosul campaign or trained at Fort Campbell in 2018 to 2019, they know about the medic from Youngstown who calculated when everyone else hesitated, who ran toward gunfire 3 times and brought everyone back, who spent 8 years developing a method that saved lives and never sought recognition for it. Sometimes, when teaching SOTFC, they tell students, this methodology was developed by a combat medic in Iraq who understood that time matters more than safety when soldiers are bleeding out. He figured out that 90 seconds of smoke could buy enough time to compress the treatment window, and he was right. They don't name him, but they teach his method, and soldiers learn it, and some of them deploy. And some of them face the same calculation Kellerman faced. Conventional doctrine says wait, but waiting means watching someone die, and maybe, just maybe, there's a better way. And when the moment comes, when they pull that smoke grenade and run into the kill zone, calculating risk and movement and treatment time, they're carrying forward something that started with a kid from Youngstown who worked at AutoZone and learned from his father that you don't waste steps when people are bleeding. There's a temptation to call stories like this myth. It's easy to think that military doctrine emerges from laboratories and officer academies, from strategic planning sessions and multi-year research programs. That innovations come from the top down, authorized and sanctioned and carefully controlled. But the truth is more complicated. Wars are decided not just by strategy and technology, but by moments, split-second calculations made by ordinary people in impossible situations, by soldiers who understand that sometimes the book is wrong, that sometimes the safest course of action is the one that leads to the most death, and that breaking rules might be the only moral choice. James Kellerman didn't change the entire way wars are fought. He didn't revolutionize military medicine. He simply understood something fundamental, that in combat, time is measured in heartbeats, and every second you wait is another second someone bleeds. He did the math. He saw that 90 seconds of smoke could compress a 4-minute exposure window, that running toward danger could be safer than waiting for danger to finish its work, that sometimes the calculated risk is actually the conservative choice. And he had the courage, or the stubbornness, or the simple faith in his own calculations to test that understanding when it mattered most. 14 people survived October 17th, 2016, because of that decision. Dozens more survived afterward because he taught others to calculate the same way. How many lives were saved by the students of his students, by the medics trained in methods he pioneered, by the doctrine changes that emerged from his work? There's no way to count. No database tracks it. No monument records it. But somewhere, right now, there's a medic in a convoy rolling through hostile territory, smoke grenades in their aid bag, thinking about treatment windows and movement patterns and the moment when conventional wisdom becomes conventional death. And when that moment comes, if it comes, some of them will make the same choice Kellerman made. Not because they're heroes, because the math works. So here's my question for you. Put yourself in that Humvee on October 17th, 2016. You're watching soldiers bleed in the street 30 meters away. You know they have maybe 3 minutes before hemorrhage kills them. You know that protocol says establish a CCP, wait for fire suppression, don't expose yourself. You also know that by the time fire suppression is effective, they'll be dead. Would you have pulled that smoke grenade? Would you have run into the kill zone? Or would you have followed protocol and lived with the outcome? Let us know in the comments below. And here's what I want to know. What shocked you most about this story? Was it that Kellerman spent 8 years developing this method in secret? That his own instructors called it, quote, fucking insane? Or that it actually worked, not just once, but repeatedly, with an 87.5% success rate? Did you know that combat medics have been developing unconventional casualty evacuation methods for years, testing ideas that never make it into official doctrine until someone proves them in combat? Which moment stayed with you? The initial decision to deploy smoke, the repeated trips into danger, or the quiet aftermath when Kellerman returned to Youngstown and never spoke about it again? Tell us in the comments. If you believe that wars are won not just by superior firepower, but by ordinary people making extraordinary calculations under impossible pressure, share this with someone who thinks they know how combat medicine works. Because sometimes the textbook is wrong. Sometimes the rule that keeps you safe is the rule that gets others killed. And sometimes one medic with a smoke grenade and a calculator in his head is enough to prove that there's a better way, even if it takes 8 years of mockery, 11 minutes of terror, and a lifetime of silence to prove it. Because sometimes the smallest calculation becomes the loudest legacy.